It is an interesting question, the question about the other, because actually it is a question that always draws us back to ourselves, always. It immediately makes me think of no correlation whatsoever. Well, actually there is. The question of sometimes there are scientists, astrophysicists for instance, who are looking for some life somewhere else. And when we do look for that, usually there are lots of concepts coming up about what sorts of life we'll find elsewhere. And that question of otherness, another form of life, it genuinely draws us back to the question what it is that we're looking for. So when we are interacting with others, it already shows us a little bit what we're looking for, what we want to find, knowing that by asking the question about the other, given that to many people when we talk about the other, that means another human, since we are often identified to our species, that's usually how we think. But me, when I'm told about the other, I immediately think of all forms. And what's interesting is that each form called other, if we talk from the absolute standpoint, is a manifestation of consciousness that takes this aspect, this form. What's interesting is that since that form draws us back to ourselves, well, then the other disappears. Indeed, automatically, the other disappears. Comes a moment when there's no more other. During private discussion, I can see that otherness, which is often the backing of the spiritual path, can appear as many different forms. For instance, I met someone a little while ago whose spiritual path was birds. So the other, to him, was observing birds, and the realization of the self happened through birds' observation. To some, it will go through objects, like people into craftsmanship. So the other will be an object that we call inanimate, even though it is animate on the atomic level, or even subatomic. And there's also people who will go through plants, etc. So your question was, can the other be the source of our joy or sadness? Now that is an illusion. It is called the Lila in India, the divine game, a game that will, exactly the same way a child will set a situation, like a role play, with their toys. Absolute consciousness does the same. It will have fun setting up situations with many forms and many beings to bring you back to what you are. And it's infinite, limitless. There can be lots of situations, lots of beings. And in those settings, we get the impression, but that's just an impression, that the other can be the source of our joy or our sadness. When in fact, the truth is that's completely false. And as said very well Siddhartha Gautama, who we call Buddha, but truly there were lots of Buddhas, since Buddha means enlightened, so there was a lot of them. So Siddhartha Gautama said, by oneself in truth we create suffering, and by oneself in truth we liberate ourselves from it. So no one is the source of our suffering. I often pick anger as an example. People say, you make me angry, or that kind of thing, when in fact it isn't true. It is us on our own who get angry. You can have the same setup of an exchange with someone, and depending on who's living it, the outcome won't be the same. So truly, no, the other can't. When I say the other, I mean it in a vast way. It can't be the source of joy or anger. And if we go even further, we will use that precisely to realize our every time within ourselves something is moved emotionally in a relationship or during an interplay with the other, we'll be able to go and have a look to see what kind of limiting belief about ourselves it reveals. So actually the other, you could say, is the perfect tool to reveal ourselves to us. You could put it that way. So there are two tools, the interplay with another and also the physical body, which never lies, which will always reveal through tears, jerks, or even screams sometimes, or tremors. It will always reveal where the limiting belief is while interacting with the other. And with the emotion coming up, we'll realize what was the limiting belief in the background, and we'll liberate ourselves from it. In the end, the spiritual path has a lot to do with meeting alterity, as they say in science, which draws us back to ourselves, which brings us back to ourselves as a sort of echo. It's very well put. In any case, as long as there's identification to the multiplicity of objects, well, it is true. It appears like there are objects. It appears so, because we go through the prism of tools that are themselves objects. What I mean by objects are the five senses as a first step, and then senses a little more subtle, but that are still part of the relative, so they're pretty close to what enters the realm of manifestation. As long as we go through that prism, we identify to objects, meaning to others, so we do see objects. Now, if we push things a little bit further and we come back, so to speak, to this attention turned on ourselves, if we refocus on the heart, so this is where it goes further. We can then fully experience that we already are, because we come back here, somewhere which is not locatable. Here, we become aware that there's no objects, so there's no more identifications, no more others. There's simply the self, only the self. But what gives the impression that there's all that is truly this sort of veiling, this identifying stories told amongst others by the five senses. Those are the ones defining all that. If we go further, if we stay here, where it's not locatable, there's no object. This or this, it is actually formless. So if we can realize that from the start, if we keep going back to that, to the source, as Ramanamaharshi often said, at that moment, there are much less challenges with identifying with something that would make one happy or unhappy, but that would rather be a sort of joy is just a word, but something that is equanimous permanently. And from then on, indeed, there are no others. So no more men, no more women, no more objects. We are. But that's just to push things a little bit further. It is hard to apprehend. But a good subject for introspection is to investigate how it is at the very source of ourselves, see what it's made of. And the source of ourselves, automatically, it is not something that we look for within our thoughts. If I ask someone, go to the source of yourself, or what is the taste of life, or what is the most intimate of yourself, there's a lot of ways to ask that question. And there, actually, it's not in the thinking mind that we look for, neither is it in the sensations. We realize there's simply a presence, formless. And when this formless presence is noticed and recognized, well, then it's automatic. It recognizes itself through all forms as if it was, how can I put it? It's very difficult to explain. Life isn't a form, fundamentally. Actually, that's the reason why we talk about forms of life. Life can embody all forms, but it isn't a form in itself. Fundamentally, life with a capital L is not a form, and to realize the self is also to realize life. Really, the self as the self with a capital S doesn't need to be implicated in a scenario or an act of manifesting objects. It is only there to keep on playing a seeming illusion, a seeming of Maya, to precisely, apparently experiment things and remember that we are that, this self with a capital S. If we constantly start from that absolute, which is why we keep talking about coming back and back and back, it's precisely so that seekers realize fully that as the self, there is only the self. It might sound bizarre because truly there is no experience, no identification, no manifestation. It is totally one. It is one. It doesn't move. It doesn't change. So all of that, even, is really but appearances. But it is also apparently through those appearances that we can again remember what we are. So it is part of the game. That's what the Maya is about. The Lord's Leelas. We're playing. Consciousness marvels at itself constantly. And do not forget, every time we use terms and words and sentences, when we structure a sentence to, so to speak, try and explain something when we are asked questions, just give it a context. Those are just words and sentences. As beautiful the words and sentences may be, as beautiful poetry may be, we actually can't fundamentally explain and define the self. It isn't possible. It can only be lived inwardly. That's it.